Gustavo Faleiros, welcome to Primo NUTMEG.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you for meeting with me here in Sao Paulo. It's wonderful to get to see Brazil firsthand, and I think it's a really good time to come here and talk about the Amazon with all of the news the past week or two. So when I was a kid, I remember learning about the Amazon and about how there were fires and there was deforestation, and it seemed like at least in the U.S. that news kind of went away for a while. Or at least just in my perspective, it didn't get as much coverage. And now suddenly the last week or two, we're hearing about these fires and how devastating it is.
So what we see now is actually a peak of a trend that has started 5 years, maybe 7 years ago, that shows deforestation going up again. So after years, maybe that's one of the reasons why the news is not so big years ago in the U.S. because for many years in the past decade, the deforestation was going down. So that's maybe the reason why the news was not so big. But in the past 7 years, since 2012, we had a trend, an upward trend in the deforestation. And what I see happening now, it's actually maybe the peak or like the maximum expression of this trend being seen. So let me give you just a brief timeline of what was the trend over the years. So we monitor deforestation in Brazil since 1988, and at that moment deforestation was really high. It was the beginning of it was the end of the military dictatorship in Brazil. So there was a surge of investments, a change in the policies for economic policies as well. So there was a lot of occupation of the Amazon by the end of the 80s. That's when, for example, we had a character like Chico Mendes. I don't know if you heard about Chico Mendes. It's definitely one of the most prominent environmentalists of Brazil. He was murdered in 1988. Wow. Because he was defending the Amazon region in the state of Acre. So that was a big event showing how much conflict there were at that point around that region, the Amazon, and the conflict between cattle ranchers and people living in the forest and using the products of the forest. So Chico Mendes was this guy. And after that, you still would have, during the 90s, a big trend of deforestation, which actually reached the peak in 1995. So 1995, it was the highest deforestation ever recorded in Brazil. Okay. So it's not right to say that now deforestation is reaching any kind of record, because it's not true. Actually, the highest level of higher than 20,000 square kilometers was reached in 1995. Because of the scandal of that time of having such a big deforestation, policies were implemented. Actually, the Minister of Environment was created at this moment. The first Minister of Environment took place, got his job, so to speak, in 1995. We had a previous, an arrangement similar to the U.S. We had a Department of Interior, and they have an environmental secretariat. That was their arrangement since the 70s in Brazil. But then in 1994, 1995, because of the highest deforestation, they created the Ministry of Environment. And so the deforestation started going down, and until the beginning of the 2000s, when again some kind of economic hope and at the beginning of the Lula government pushed deforestation up again, because there was this expectation of economic growth. And we had another peak of high deforestation in 2004. And again, it was a big scandal that things could happen that way. It was much higher than now again. I don't remember quite the number. I think it was 13,000 square kilometers in 2004. And the response of the Lula government for that was creating what we call the Plan of Combating Deforestation, the National Plan of Combating Deforestation, which was a plan that would put together 14 ministries to work together against deforestation, and that worked really well. That happened in parallel of the climate negotiations. So Brazil also committed to reduce deforestation to reduce emissions, because most of the emissions of carbon dioxide, of greenhouse gases emissions of Brazil are originated by deforestation, on the land use change. And because of these commitments with climate change, because of the bad repercussion of deforestation worldwide, I think the government took action, created this plan with 14 ministers, and worked. So we saw actually from 2004 to 2012 a reduction of 72% of deforestation in Brazil. So that's why probably the news were not so big at that point. You would see very positive news about Brazil, that how Brazil was managed to reduce deforestation. 72% was really, really big. And we reached the lowest rate of deforestation in 2012, around 4,200 square kilometers.
So the lowest since the late 80s?
Yes.
Okay.
That was in the historical series. That was the lowest point, 2012.
Okay.
And then things start changing. 2013 already increased. 2014 kind of stay in the same level, but the trend is upwards up to now. Mm-hmm. And what we see now, it's an indication that it will increase very sharply this year. We still don't have the final data. We had indicators, so we have an alert system that has shown an increase of around 40% this year of alerts. It's not the official deforestation rate. So when that happens, when alerts go up, it means that deforestation will go up very likely. It's very unusual when the alerts go up and the official deforestation rate doesn't go up. So it's very likely it's going up. And the fires are pretty much the confirmation of this, that deforestation is going up. And the reason for that is that for the first time we have such a high number of fires in the Amazon region. So people that are defending the position of the Bolsonaro government, it's saying that there is an exaggeration. The word is this global outcry against because of the fires is just like some kind of a mediatic thing. It's not true, and the reason because this is really genuine and true is because the fires in the Amazon haven't never been so high. That's true. And looking at the trend of data of NASA for fires, not for deforestation, we will see that the fires in the Amazon are the highest in 21 years.
Okay.
And also the first indications that we have is this: fires are happening at the same places that deforestations are happening. How do we know this? Because we have a list of the municipalities which have more fire and which have more deforestation. They're the same. The same cities that are in the list of highest occurrences of fire are the same ones in the list of the highest areas of alerts of deforestation. So what we see is clear a trend of deforestation going up in the Amazon. And that's very concerning, but we're still not even speaking about the fires that are happening outside of the Amazon, which are huge as well, especially in the Cerrado. Cerrado is the Brazilian tropical savanna. It's a very rich environment. You do have like natural fires happening there, pretty much like what happened in California. You would have like biomass, dry biomass, and that's very common.
Right, and there was a drought here in Sao Paulo recently too, right?
Yeah, that was in 2016. Here the ecosystem is different. Here we call Mata Atlântica, is the Atlantic rainforest. Difficult to burn as well, but São Paulo and Rio in the southeast and the south part of Brazil are more consolidated areas. So we have a lot of pasture, a lot of sugarcane, and these crops, they burn as well. They burn not naturally, they burn a lot of times in a controlled way. So São Paulo government authorizes still the burning of sugarcane crops because that helps on the harvesting. And pastures as well during this time of the year they usually burn it to clean the pasture and start producing when the rains start again. But fires don't happen naturally in the Amazon, so this is the concerning part of it.
Right.
And the Cerrado, which is, I think it's one of the discussions that we are missing here, is actually the area where most of the commodities, soybeans, beef, are being produced to be exported, and mainly to Europe. And that's, I think, it's the key point at this point to start discussing. Okay, Europe is really putting a lot of pressure on Bolsonaro to start taking care of deforestation. Fair enough. But we need to move to also discussion like what's the role of European companies and traders on influencing deforestation and burnings in other areas of Brazil. That's not happening. So I'm concerned about this polarization of the debate, because it might seem that Europe is just doing the good job of pushing pressure in Bolsonaro, which again I think it's fair, but we need to discuss the role of multinationals and traders on the commodity market, which is really influencing what's happening in this tropical savanna that we call Cerrado.
So these fires, are they being used for deforestation to create farmland, or are they being used on land that has already been made into farmland, or is it both?
Both. Definitely it's both, because you would need to use the fire to clean pastures. Also, you would need to use fire if you're a small producer in the Amazon. So that's a very traditional technique for how do you say this? But this kind of sustaining farming, like a small farmer, you won't have a tractor, you won't have how to prepare the land without fire. So
right.
That I see myself. That's when I started visiting the Amazon for working and reporting. That's I consider a landmark for myself to understand how the economy works there. When I visited a small settlement of very poor farmers, and everything was burned. And I realized also that the guys were not doing this because they learned to burn vegetation. No, they had to, and they had no other means of producing food and opening areas to production unless they have to fire. But that to use the fire. But that's a very small part of what we see now. What we see now is really fire being used to open up the land. So one of the most interesting data that came out of this whole discussion came out from a researcher at NASA called Douglas Morton. So he was saying what we are seeing now are, after many years, of very intense fires. So when you get the satellite data, one of the columns on the spreadsheet that comes with the satellite data is the radiative power of the fires. It's actually how much power the satellites are managing to capture.
Okay.
In terms of watts. What's the heat coming out of that fire?
Makes sense.
So Douglas Morton, the scientist at NASA, is saying after many years, these fires in the Amazon are really intense, and his hypothesis is that these were areas that were cut down, and you would have like trunks. It would have trees, dead trees already in the ground, ready to be burned. So they're burning areas that were the forest maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and they're cleaning now these areas. And that's why it's so intense. The fires, so much smoke are coming out of these areas. So again, it's not an exaggeration to say this is a crisis, because it's really showing there is a deforestation pattern behind it, these fires.
Okay. And just to get some perspective for kind of Brazilian politics and what this means for the people of Brazil, you're saying that both Lula originally and Bolsonaro now were pushing for deforestation because it would mean economic growth for Brazil?
Yeah, well, in the case of Bolsonaro, it's more evident, I would say, without trying to be biased on any political level, because he really received a lot of support from the region, the Amazon region, saying that he would finally allow producers to work there because they were being constrained by the crazy environmentalist or radical environmentalist. He actually said during the campaign that he would take the environmental police out of their bags. He said, literally this, like, vou tirar o Ibama do cangote do produtor, which means like I'm taking Ibama, which is the environmental police, of their how do you say this? They will stop chasing them. So that was a clear sign from Bolsonaro. Other things. So the environmental police, when they get like a truck full of like illegal trees, or they get to an area where there is a machine exploring illegally gold within an indigenous land, the law and the practice of the environmental police is to burn these machines, because it's such a remote place. You cannot just drag this machine and put it in a patio until the judge decides what to do with that. No, they decided to just burn it to stop the activity. So that's always like a big issue, because they're saying like, oh, these people are put a lot of money on buying these things and you're destroying it. So Bolsonaro expressly forbade the environmental police to keep doing this. So it's a sign that, you know, which side he's taking. That's, at least for me, it's very clear. Lula, I think he never expressed things like this, like Bolsonaro did, but there was such a confidence in the first year, second year of his government, that I think this is naturally a sign of economic activity. In the Amazon, the economic activity, through a lot of times, it's happening with illegal practices.
Right.
So if you look at the data over the years, you will see like when the GDP grows, deforestation grows. There was just 1 year that was unusual. Remember, I wrote about that when the GDP was going down and deforestation was going up, and that happened during Dilma. So there was an extraordinary or like an unusual thing to happen, having this diverging trends.
Right.
But over the years, that's what happened. Like GDP goes up, deforestation goes up as well. So what I think happened during the Lula period was like so much confidence, and there was a lot of economic growth that deforestation kind of followed that, and we have to admit, like right after the highest deforestation in his government was detected, they responded really well, in coordinating a task force to combat deforestation, and worked. I mean, it's data show that from 2004 to 2012 there was a 72% decrease in deforestation. What didn't happen, and I think that really connects everybody here on the debate, including Bolsonaro and his ministers, is that there was never enough investment and enough effort to transform the economy of the Amazon in something that is sustainably managed. We did at the Info Amazonia in 2015 an analysis of government budget for the Amazon region, and we noticed that investment on sustainable activities, they were just dropping or never happening. So we would have a lot of investments during the Lula government on putting helicopters and police doing exactly what Bolsonaro said, chasing illegal loggers and arresting them. A lot of intelligence happened, like the federal police was dismantling gangs of exploring timber within indigenous lands. There was a lot of that during that period. And again, it worked to reduce deforestation, but you saw the first moment that stopped, it went up again. So there was nothing that actually structured a new economic sector or would give new opportunities for those guys who were working as loggers to do whatever different thing it's good for the Amazon, or not putting so much money on the cattle ranching sector. That's on Lula for sure. The amount of money he put on the companies to produce beef and export beef from the Amazon is huge. I mean, one of the biggest beef producers in the world, it was built with public money, with this JBS, with their presence in the US, their presence in Europe, like with public money putting on them to build this big big chains of big producers. I'm not saying that we don't need this for pushing Brazil forward, but there was definitely a damage to our environment on these strategies.
Yeah, I mean, has any of that wealth gone back to the Brazilian people in any way?
No. Here we are. I mean, like we going back in terms of poverty reduction policies. We walking back in terms of environmental policy again. I don't know. GDP is not moving forward. That always has been my point, and I believe the point of many people is that okay, we had good stuff during this period where there was a lot of optimism with Lula, but because of corruption, because of bad decisions, nothing was really sustainable. We still, I think, what the moment we are living now is definitely, in part, it's caused by this lack of long-term policies for the country, for the environment, for poverty reduction, and many stuff.
And it's kind of silly in a way too, just because we think of this in such Western terms, in terms of agriculture driving GDP and whatnot. But can you really put a price tag on the Amazon? And if you also think of the indigenous people who live in the Amazon, I can't imagine what it must be like for them. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit? What's happening to the indigenous tribes who already live there, and when deforestation hits where they've lived?
Yeah, no, it's really sad, and I get a lot of questions whenever I meet people from other parts of the world, or when I go to the US. People want to know what's going to happen with the indigenous people, and more with the isolated tribes, because we do have like isolated,
right, that we've never even had contact with, with the West, right?
Or they decided to live in isolation. Mm-hmm. What is pretty much happening is you see these isolated tribes and communities going further within the forest, but well, there's no way to run, right? They're really surrounded. So we will find these tribes mostly in the western part of the Amazon frontier with Peru. They're really hiding there. But in general terms, indigenous people are really in a tricky position now, because you have a part of the society, of the productive sector, which decided to reduce their lands, and that's coming directly from Bolsonaro, and it's not an opinion, it's fact. Yesterday he made a meeting with governors from the region of the Amazon region, and accounts coming from this meeting just tell us that he was talking bad stuff about the indigenous lands, as if they were the ones to blame for the situation. Right. But let me tell you one very specific example that I have, because I went in February. I went to Rondônia, which is one of the states that are really in the center of this fire crisis. We say Rondônia is kind of a microcosmos of the Amazon, because it's really, everything happens there. Like, you have a lot of indigenous people surrounded by farms. You have a very strong productive sector on mining, cattle ranching, and other commodities. And you also have a lot of land settlements. And during the military dictatorship, a lot of people from the south were taken to Rondônia to create land settlements, occupation of that land. What's happening now in Rondônia is that you have a political elite, and with the support of the federal government, to start dismantling protected areas and indigenous lands. That haven't started now, but it became really strong now. So in February we went to Rondônia, and I went to visit two indigenous lands. One is called Caripuna, another one is called Uruê-Uauau. Situation is very, it's bleak. Caripuna especially, we walked, for example, to see an area that was being deforested recently by invaders. It was a huge area. And the community it's not so small, but you see they don't have many choices to face these threats, and they cry for help. You have the church helping there. You have NGOs like Greenpeace or local NGOs trying to help, but it's really a force that it doesn't stop. And you start investigating, and you see there's a lot of effort like to try to get land titles, sometimes illegal land titles, to take hold of that land. So there's a pressure to effectively take that land. That's what's happening a lot of indigenous tribe. And there are other two things that are happening that are very concerning. One is a discourse from the president saying like we should bring indigenous people to the kind of the normal economy. So they're saying like indigenous people should be allowed to produce soybeans within their lands, and should be allowed to form contracts with logging companies. It's actually, there was a piece of law that is moving really quick in the Congress to allow this to happen. We're not saying that indigenous people should not be allowed to produce or participate on any kind of market, but the way it's being done is that like it's being pushed into them, and I think this is really concerning. The other thing is like there is a real discussion really to create a law that would allow mining within indigenous lands, and especially what we call artisanal mining, which is very damaging to the environment. It's already happening everywhere illegally. It doesn't mean that we need to legalize just because it's happening.
Right.
They tried this in Peru, it didn't work. In Peru was such a massive destruction in Madre de Dios of gold mining that they said like, oh, we have no other option other than legalize this artisanal miners. Okay, this is really poor people that accept to go to the frontier and start exploring, but there's capital behind it. In the case of Peru, they proved there was a lot of Chinese investors coming and buying the machines and hiring poor people to work for them. And here is not very different. There's some capital behind. You cannot start just opening a mine with some kind of machine without big money behind.
Right.
And so we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, imagine if they really allow investors to go into these huge areas that are still preserved, that are still part of traditional systems of life, to be explored by this kind of mining. I think it's really concerning. I think if that happens, it's going to really change the landscape of the Amazon. But I don't think it will. I think that's a good sign of hope. I think there's people in the Congress, there's people in the military that just think this is absurd. In Brazil, it was legally constituted, or the Constitution of 1988 recognized the role of these lands to preserve the nature, or to serve as a reparation of everything that was taken from the people who were living here 500 years ago. So that's we want to believe is really consolidate in terms of in legal terms. And so I have hope that in the Congress, in the justice, in the military, they will defend the indigenous people against this
attempts. So what needs to be done? What do they practically need to do to stop what's happening?
Well, I think there was a beginning last week. I don't think it's true, but I mean, I don't think it's genuine. But Bolsonaro actually recognized that he needed to do something, so we went to TV.
Well, so just to clarify too, I believe he's actually accused NGOs of starting the fires, right?
Well, he did, but the backlash was so big that Friday night, after a week of like this mess that we saw last week, he went to TV and saying like, we will find the culprits and we'll stop illegal deforestation. Kind of vague, but it was the first time he actually said that he would do something against deforestation. I'm not saying this will solve everything overnight, but this is a good start, and to have a recognition there's a crisis going on. So this is a start, but we will need a lot of coordination in various levels. Federal, the state governments are essential to participate, because this is something that also came since the Lula government. Decentralization of all the monitoring of the logging activities and deforestation to the states. Before it was everything concentrated in the federal level, but then they started a process. There was a law, which I forgot the number of the law, but which started to decentralize all these responsibilities of monitoring. So there are different states doing different stuff, but
there must be at least one or two states that are having a positive role in this and stopping this, right?
Yeah, I think there is a positive signs coming from Pará and Mato Grosso that are historically the two states with more deforestation and fires, also because they're huge states. And so you will see the governors admitting, or not admitting, but pointing to the right problems. They're saying like, this is illegal activities, we need to seize this as a criminal activity that needs intelligence and need police and need combat. And at the same time, they talk about like, we need to give opportunities to the producers and everything. So this is, in my opinion, although the problem is not solved, a mature position, which is great. And we will see, because things are so polarized, it sounds bad that you say, like the Minister of Environment, it's right when he says that there was nothing much done in terms of creating sustainability to the Amazon region. So it's so polarized that people want to just beat him when he says like, we need more capitalism in the Amazon. It's bad. I mean, like, I don't trust their intentions as well, I have to say. But I want to say that it's true. What he's actually saying, that we need more economic solution to that region. I can see other way. How this is going to be done, I think we have a start now that everybody's seeing this as a crisis, and we will need help. This is another big issue, the sovereignty issues, right? Like everybody said, we don't need help because the Amazon is ours. We do whatever we want with it. It's not true, man. I mean, like, there's so much at stake here. It's like climate change, international market. I'm for it. I mean, like, we should treat the Amazon as a kind of a collective effort. And apart from this, if we take this position, who knows what Peru is going to do next year? If Peru decided to build a dam in the Amazon River, for example, in the upstream of the Amazon River, what's going to happen? Like with millions of people in Brazil, they have the power on us because they have the sources of water. So we really need to be more diplomatic on how to treat this region. There's so much investments here. The biggest mining operations of Brazil are actually based in the Amazon region. A lot of the beef and the soybeans are also coming from there. So we are internationally linked with the world through this region.
Well, so I mean, also we're kind of taking this for granted, for deforesting the Amazon is bad, but just to put it into real terms, if we were just to go nuts and completely open the Amazon and let farmers run rampant, what would that practically mean for Brazil and for the world?
I think we're screwed. I think we're screwed because you asked me about the drought in São Paulo 2016. There are, consistent studies showing there's a connection between what happened here and what happened in the Amazon. So one of the big debates were how this system, which in a popular terms it was called the flying rivers, are connecting the whole South America. So if you look at the satellite imagery in the rainy season, you will see moisture coming out of the Amazon being blown through by Atlantic streams coming from the Atlantic Ocean, hitting the Andes and coming down south. So rains that are originated in the Amazon, they reach the center of Brazil, which are the biggest producers of grains, and they reach the south of Brazil, where there's a lot of production as well, and they reach Argentina, all the production area of Argentina. So we totally connect. The economy of South America is totally connected with the Amazon. And this is fact. The satellites are filming this. They have picture of that. Same thing happened with the smoke. When you don't have the moisture, is the smoke that comes out, it's blown to the Andes and comes south. So there's no doubt that when there's a lot of pollution in the Amazon, people from Rio Grande do Sul, which are 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers south, or in the south or some parts of Argentina, can receive some of that smoke. There was a big discussion if São Paulo turned to a dark weather 2 weeks ago because of the smoke. I don't know if or I haven't seen any scientific study that proves that the city went dark because of the smoke. But there was definitely smoke in the city. That's true. Again, satellites have shown, studies from the University of São Paulo have done analysis of the water of that day, of rain that came down that day, showing there was traces of chemical elements of smoke in that water. So look at this, we're all connected. Now imagine no trees in the Amazon. There will be no rain. That's straightforward like that, and that I just can see as a bad thing. And we will, I think the economy of the region will suffer a lot if we don't manage to have a sustainable activity or sustainable economic activity in the Amazon region.
So for folks out there in the US, in Europe, Canada, Australia, who really care about this issue, how can they get involved? What can they do?
Well, there's a lot of local and global NGOs working in the Amazon. I think they're both levels of activity are very important, because the locals here, they're working on things like sustainable alternatives to the use of fire. So these NGOs need support to keep implementing their work on the ground, to train from small farmers to big farmers to indigenous people on finding sustainable ways of producing, bringing technology to this people and to this region, and new knowledge, and making sure that new scientific studies are understood in this region. On a global level, I think a lot of NGOs, institutes, scientists are working with big companies that have a stake here in this region, investments on mining and producing and traders of commodities, that they have some responsibility on what's going on here, and so I do believe in this in the non-profit sector as a big players right now. So they might need some support, or people who wants to work with them. I think they might find good places in these NGOs. There is a lot in terms of information. I don't think it's the best option now for us to be advocating that we should boycott Brazilian products, or we should pressure our governments to create sanctions to Brazil. I think this is when we'll end up creating more problems, because people will have to find a solution and might create a very unsustainable domestic market, in the case, which I don't think will happen, that Brazil becomes totally isolated by other countries. I don't think it's going to happen, but if the citizens of the US or Europe just start pushing for this, you might have some collaterals, in my opinion. So I think it's one of the good ways is to work with information in a very profound, or very how can I say? Well, in a very analytical way. So there's scientific studies, or there's data that, like the ones we use in InfoAmazonia, that helps to create the debate. So I'm saying, like, if you start using this information to participate on debates on which should be the products or the policies that your country should support, I think it's more intelligent and more effective than just create an outcry for sanctions or boycott. So what I'm saying, in summary, what I'm trying to say is, like, you can get involved with a lot of groundwork or policy work with NGOs and institutes. And if you are interested to work in this issue, there's a lot of opportunities. But I think the information, to keep the information on the agenda, will be essential at this point. I think we need this debate to continue. As you said in the beginning, why we're seeing this global outcry because of deforestation now, and I don't know, just a few years ago we thought everything was okay. I think it was never actually okay. It's really bad now. It's great that the world is paying attention, but we need this attention to keep going. We need this deep debate. We need this informative debate about what is the economy of the Amazon region or of the Cerrado, the Brazilian savanna, and how this economy is linked to the rest of the world, and try to start this process of rediscussing this, how the world can help, how Brazil should manage this. It is a human patrimony. So you will hear from the Minister of Environment, this is bullshit, that the world should not treat the Amazon as something that is global or a human or patrimony, but or a human asset. But I think they should, because it is. So if we keep this discussion going on, I think a lot can be done, because we will understand what needs to be done, what kind of support needs to come, and we need a long-term commitment with these regions, because what we're having now, this climate emergency, as they were saying in Europe, right? We're seeing more and more newspapers like The Guardian or even the New York Times not using climate change anymore, but the climate emergency. If we agree that we are living a key moment in terms of our survival in this planet, we should collectively look at these regions with a lot of care. That's, I think, my main thought.
Well, Gustavo, I really appreciate you joining me for this episode of Primo NUTMEG and discussing this very important topic. I think this is something that, regardless of where you are in the political spectrum or just any of your other beliefs, that we should all be able to get together on saving the Amazon. So thank you very much for discussing this. For folks out there who would like to follow you and Info Amazonia, how can they do that?
Thanks for this invitation, Steve. I do agree. I think the environment unites us, and I think in this moment of a lot of political division and polarization, I think the environment might take us to another level of maturity, political maturity. But for Info Amazonia, just check the website, infoamazonia.org, or you can follow us on Twitter. We have an English account, we have a Spanish account, we have a Portuguese account, and I don't know, just keep an eye in the Amazon, and we'll be in touch naturally.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.